Okay, sweet. And then I think I'm gonna make it full screen because it's really okay, cool. Okay. Um, so I'd been wanting to ask really like a little bit more about the job that you're doing specifically and kind of what led you to like that role. I don't know if it was like a title that you saw and it just like stuck out to you any for any specific reason, or if it was just like this is a job specifically that I want to find because it's a place where I feel like it's not really, you know, catered towards. So I guess if you want to kind of start at that, because it does really sound interesting. Is a bilingual child therapist, was it? Or
Bilingual child and adolescent therapist.
okay,
Yeah.
sweet. Cool. So yeah, if you don't mind telling me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely. Um, it's still very early into me beginning working with them, so I haven't really got my hands very deep into the work.
Right.
But the agency that I work for, their name's Safe Shores. They are a nonprofit child advocacy center based in DC, and we specialize in helping families and their children process different trauma that they've experienced, specifically neglect, physical abuse, sexual exploitation, things of that nature.
Okay.
It's it's interesting because if you would have told me 5 years ago that this is what I'd be doing right now, even if you would have told me last year that this is what I would be doing, I wouldn't believe it.
All right. Yeah.
So my journey into this is very interesting. I'll take us way back to high school.
Okay.
So
Shit they.
in high school, I was part of a business and finance academy. So most of my coursework was geared towards finance, economics,
Okay.
business administration, things of that nature.
Yeah.
And I originally thought I wanted to get into the Ross Business School at the University of Michigan so that I could become an accountant. That was
Okay.
my original goal.
That's a solid plan for sure.
Yeah, but I I would say for a lot of my life I experienced mental health problems, but they became more prominent my junior and senior year of high school.
Okay.
And I eventually, and I'm grateful for this, I was able to find a therapist that really helped me with managing the different crises that were coming up for me at the time.
Yeah.
So once I got into therapy more regularly, I decided I didn't want to do business anymore and that I instead wanted to be a psychiatrist.
Oh wow.
So when I first
Dang.
got, yeah, so when I first got to U of M in 2018, I was a psychology major on the pre-med track.
Okay. All right.
hmm And I joined a student organization called La Casa, which is the Central Latina Student Org on campus.
Right.
And a lot of the people I met in that organization mentioned a minor that they all were part of called Community Action and Social Change through the School of Social Work.
Yeah, yeah.
And I didn't really know much about social work at the time. I honestly didn't know much about CASC either. But if everyone else was doing it, I thought to myself, might as well do it too.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and the cool thing about the cask miner is there are certain pockets of classes that you need to take, but you have autonomy as to how you want to fulfill those requirements. So
Okay.
you get the chance to really develop your own curriculum of sorts. And I started leaning in towards social justice oriented work,
Yeah.
particularly with the Spanish speaking community in Michigan.
Okay, yeah.
And I remember, I want to say this was second half of my sophomore year, maybe first half of my junior year of undergrad. I had an appointment with my academic advisor through my minor, and I had a conversation with him. And his name is Joe. And Joe asked me, "Oh, what do you want to do with your life, essentially?" And I said, "Well, I'm thinking of going into medicine. I want to go into psychiatry so I could help people who've experienced mental health challenges, X, Y, and Z."
Yeah.
And the more we talked, he was just listening. And once I finished, he told me, "You know, if you really want to go to med school, you can totally do that.
Yeah.
But from what you're telling me, it sounds like you could do that with the MSW, which is a Master's of Social Work." And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, huh, hmm. And then I started doing my own research. And then I started telling people I think I want to do social work. And the
Yeah.
more I talked to people about it, the more excited I got
Oh,
about the prospect of being a social worker.
right. Yeah.
So I eventually applied for the MSW program at U of M. I got accepted. And then that was the final switch where I thought to myself, I want to be a therapist
Yeah.
and I just want to be able to help people. And therapy, in my mind anyway, gave me more of that direct practice where I could actually help people on a more regular basis versus at least my understanding of psychiatry at the time was you just check in with clients or
Right.
patients for their medication management and then you're done. But I
Yeah.
wanted to do more than that. And eventually, when I was in the program, part of the degree is we have to do field education where you have to get X amount of hours where you're actually in the field doing work, getting
Right.
that first hand experience so that you can be more prepared to be a social worker once you finish grad school. And when I was applying for different placements, I knew that I wanted to work somewhere that I could work with children and teens
Yeah.
because of my own experience with therapy. I wanted to have that same impact on the youth.
Yeah.
And being someone who is BIPOC, I wanted to essentially diversify the field because most of most of the field is white people. And
Right.
that's not to say white people aren't good therapists and aren't good clinicians. But when you're working with clients of color, building that relationship with them initially, building that understanding is essential. And it's important that you have sort of an understanding of who they are identity wise. And the big reason why a lot of people of color do not seek therapy is because they feel that they aren't represented when they
Yeah.
go to different agencies to try to find therapists. So hopefully me going into the field would be a way to allow other Latina, Hispanic, Spanish speaking people have access to the service that they might not have had before.
Yeah.
And through my field experience, my supervisor at the time, he was a trauma focused therapist. So I learned a lot about trauma through him and through working with my clients. So when I started applying for jobs post graduation, I didn't necessarily set out to find a trauma focused job, but I knew that I wanted to work with BIPOC communities. And because I am a native Spanish speaker, I wanted to use that asset in my work. So when I came across the job posting for Safe Shores, it just felt like a perfect fit.
That's amazing. I think that's definitely a great place to start because on a more personal note, it's been something that I've been thinking about more recently. Emphasizing like the people of color aspect. This is something that I want to say is kind of like a new thing for me because which is weird, especially because I'm black. So it's like, well, it's something that I didn't really consider much beforehand until recently I had a conversation with a coworker where she basically laid out like how different it can be. Mind you, she's a social worker and she's been a case manager for like a low income housing community for a while now. Like, I want to say like at least 5, 6 years. Um, but she kind of laid out a lot of like the stark differences between how it can just be like, you know, being a man of color is a different realm in a lot of areas. It was kind of a conversation where I was telling her about a lot of stuff that I was going through. And she kind of pointed out some things that I just kind of accepted as defaults for a lot of my life, I want to say.
Hmm.
But really started thinking about it and I'm just like, okay, well, there is a different standard and relatively speaking, like when it comes to my environment, it does change a lot, being specifically a man of color in a predominantly like white area, and not even an area, like a country. Um, so first off, kudos to you for getting into something like that because it is definitely needed. I can imagine what
Thank
it's
you.
like. Yeah, yeah. Especially on that end, because it's like, well, I'm coming from my own realm, but it's like there's a need for everything. Um, on that note, so I know we texted a little bit about the language thing. Um, I wanted to ask you personally, kind of like how you felt about with the whole like language and identity thing, because I know I touched on it like a little bit, and I'm making a stretch here because I wasn't saying it's the same for me, but I even noticed I started speaking more Spanish, and I feel like I have another aspect of myself that like I'm building up, or another identity almost in a sense. So I guess I wanted to hear you speak on like your personal experience with the whole thing, and you know, your thoughts.
Yeah, for sure. I think that language is very special.
Right.
You you are able to connect with people on such a different level if you speak in their native language.
Yeah.
I, as an aside, so as part of my onboarding for my job, I had to get first aid and CPR certified.
Okay.
So last week I was in DC waiting at the Red Cross headquarters so I could start my training. And I got there a little early, so I was just waiting for the doors to open up.
Yeah.
And while I was waiting, I was approached by a woman who seemed to be lost and needed help getting where she needed to go. And at first, I had my headphones in, so I couldn't really hear her. And I responded to her in English. And when she responded to me back, it to me it sounded like she had an accent.
Yeah.
So I started talking back in Spanish. And I always try to talk in Spanish to the people who I think speak Spanish, both because I think it might be easier for them
Yeah.
to communicate what they need, but also because it allows me to keep practicing my Spanish because it's not something that I want to lose the ability to do.
Right.
So we started talking Spanish with one another, and I ended up walking with her to where she needed to go because I had some downtime. And she mentioned to me that she was from Colombia.
Okay.
And she asked me where I was from. And I said, well, I was born here in the States, but that my family's from El Salvador. And then she sort of chuckled and said, yeah, I could tell you're American because of your accent. And I said, yeah, yeah, but I just enjoy having the opportunity to practice the language with people because I just don't want to lose it.
Right.
Spanish was the first language that I ever learned how to speak because my mother, she doesn't speak English.
Okay.
So I grew up speaking Spanish in the household with my mother. I speak English with my siblings, but growing up a lot of my life, it was Spanish. I would talk Spanish with my family. I would go with my mom to appointments and translate for her. I used to be a part of like an international club in school. I was part of the Spanish Honor Society in high school. Spanish was something that was important to me because it was a way for me to connect with my family. It was a way for me to connect with our culture because of food and music and customs and that sort of thing. So I always knew that the person that I am is tied to the language that I speak.
Yeah.
And in order for me to feel like my whole self, I wanted to make sure that I kept Spanish in my life. And whether that is just talking with people or now, thankfully, I'm lucky enough to use it for my profession, I wanted to make sure that I had Spanish. And moving to Michigan for school, it was very difficult because I grew up in a predominantly Black and Latina community. And because of the intermingling of the people in where I grew up in Maryland, Spanish was heard very often. And to go
Yeah.
from that to this area where it's predominantly upper class white people, it was very hard for me to find a way to keep Spanish in my life. So I kept taking Spanish classes in undergrad. I started joining Latina centered student org so that I had an opportunity to learn more about the different cultures and to keep that language. I joined a Latino fraternity as a way to learn more about my own culture and to keep that going. And I took all these steps because I thought it was important to better myself by learning more about the culture of my people.
Yeah.
And the Latina community is not a monolith. There's so many different people that are part of this collective group of people. And for me, now thinking as a professional, in order to develop cultural competency and be the best clinician I can be possible for my clients, I need to be able to learn more about different cultures so that I could find a way to connect with them. For Spanish speaking communities, sometimes language is lost in translation. So, for
Yeah.
example, sometimes we have idioms in English that they wouldn't understand if we directly translated it into Spanish because it's not always a one-to-one translation. There's certain customs that come with the language. There's certain cultural norms that we as a society in Central and South America aren't used to with more mainstream American culture. So, for example, we have this thing in our culture where it's called machismo, and it's essentially toxic masculinity is the best way I would describe it
Yeah.
for an American audience. But it's very deeply embedded into your upbringing and your culture as soon as you're born.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to be able to attempt to unlearn that with a client if I'm not well versed in it. And the only way I could be well versed in it is to allow myself the opportunity to learn more about these things in the
Okay. Yeah.
culture. And in order to be able to do that, I need to have the language to be able to communicate these things.
Yeah.
Because, like, what we're doing right now, it feels very natural for me because I grew up in an English speaking world.
Right.
But being able to have this same dialogue with someone in Spanish, that's a skill
Yeah.
that I need to keep practicing so that I have the ability to do this conversation justice with someone in
Yeah.
Spanish.
Yeah. Yeah. It's wild hearing you say that because I think about a lot of the time because I've worked in a lot of kitchens. A lot of the kitchens here specifically have like Latino people working in the kitchen. It's a common theme. I've talked about it with Donnie like a lot. It's actually like kind of trippy when you start thinking about it. It's like every other kind of, ethnic food group. It's just like that one that says a lot. There's something I've been thinking about, like in terms of like ability to just cook good food. I felt like that's just a great sign. But um, I've spent a decent amount of time like trying to talk with people in Spanish. Um, and it's frustrating. It gets really, really frustrating when it's just like the lost in translation thing, I feel like doesn't even give it justice sometimes because it's like there's like little things, especially when there's more being communicated than the actual like words and like there's like contextual things going on. So I feel like there's been plenty of times where like I don't want to say plenty of times, but like times where because I'm not able to speak the language, or at least I know little aspects, or I may know this word and not the right filler word here, things start coming off the wrong way. And then, like, awkward scenario. And then next thing you know, it's just like we haven't really said a word to each other in like a week. And it's like, and I feel like the situation is a bit different. Like it's a more of a drastic case because it's just like, well, I'm like a novice when it comes to learning Spanish and whatnot. But I think the concept still kind of applies even right there. Um, there'd be like little small things a lot of the time, especially where it's just like it can change the whole meaning of a sentence or a context of the whole thing. It's just like I can't even imagine like the more kind of cultural based stuff, A lot of the time when I'm talking, it's just the, you know, table, object, immediate surrounding type things, as opposed to like trying to talk about someone's feelings and having to, basically get into what that may have meant in that moment and how people can perceive things differently. So I assume that's got to be a lot, like especially working with kids. I want to say, and like adolescents. I don't know if you want to speak on that much. I don't know how much experience you've gotten to, feel comfortable speaking about engaging with clients and whatnot. But
Yeah, definitely. Before I answer that, just I'm just thinking about how even in different Spanish speaking countries, we all have different phrases to say the same thing.
yeah,
So like essentially different dialects of the Spanish language, which also make it a little more difficult when you think about nuances and what you're trying to say.
yeah,
In in regards to working with children and teens directly, I haven't had to do that in Spanish as of yet, but
okay,
I have worked with children and teens in general in a therapeutic setting, and it's very interesting the wide array of range in which people are in their understanding of things like emotions or things like relaxation or very basic therapeutic foundational concepts
yeah,
that you build on. So when I start working with a client, I want to say the first two, three, 4 sessions is essentially rapport building, where we're building this relationship, where we're getting to know more about one another. And the thing with being a therapist is that every session is an assessment.
okay,
Whether we're doing like a proper written assessment or if I'm asking you very specific questions and writing stuff down, or even if we're just talking like this.
yeah,
So let's say you were my client right now, which you're not, but if this was a session right now and we were just having this conversation normally, I'd be assessing things such as when you mention XYZ, you avoided eye contact with me. Does this mean that you're uncomfortable with the subject?
yeah,
Oh, you have an inflection in your voice there. What might that mean about what we're talking about? You're
yeah,
talking really fast when you're talking about one particular subject, and then your speed steadies afterwards.
yeah,
So you're picking up on these little things both verbal and nonverbal, to get a better idea as to who the client is and what they are bringing to you at any
Yeah.
given time. So when we're building this relationship, I'm also gauging what level of understanding someone is coming in with. So, for example, a an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old client are both coming in to talk about bullying in school and how to manage that.
Yeah.
Even though we have one younger, one older, you still have to go off of what their actual lived experience and what their knowledge base is. Because generally, there are certain things you want to do for younger kids versus preteens and teens. But if the 8-year-old is more advanced and more mature for their age, maybe we can move away from more play therapy to help them understand concepts and move towards more client-led work.
Okay.
So, for example, when we're building the foundations for emotional regulation, which essentially means how are you going to be able to manage the intense emotions that you're experiencing on a day-to-day basis? For kids, that might mean, okay, let's build a wellness box together
Yeah.
and let's add maybe some fidgets that you could use, or maybe some words of affirmations that you could grab and read to yourself, or things of that nature. Versus typically with older teens, you ask them, okay, what sort of things do you already do in your regular life to help you feel less stressed or to help you feel more calm?
Yeah.
And build off of what you already know. But for a kid, having that direct dialogue with them might not be the most effective because they might not understand necessarily, what does it mean when I'm stressed? How does that feel? What
Yeah.
sort of things do I do that help me not feel stressed? For for an 8-year-old, the average 8-year-old, they might not have that language necessarily, but that doesn't mean all 8-year-olds in general won't have that language. So when you're working with younger people, you really just have to gauge what they're coming in with so you could curtail interventions and sessions to what their particular needs are for them at the moment.
Yeah. That was great, especially the part about basically like the emotional intelligence and like the difference between kind of like the age groups and whatnot. Because I'm like, I start thinking about it, and I'm like, well, and you kept saying you kept bouncing back to language, which I loved more than anything else. Because I'm like, well, I think about it, and I'm like, understanding your emotions, I feel like is kind of like one thing, like conceptually speaking, but being able to communicate them is an entirely different other thing, you know? Um, so I don't know. Now I'm sitting here thinking about it, and I'm like, uh, I'm in a weird spot, I want to say, because like I just recently started working with kids, and I have to plan lessons a lot of the time for activities or things that we're doing, but I usually have to follow like a theme or a criteria. Right now we've got I don't know if it's a theme for the month or the week, but it's social emotional learning. And it basically has to be a lot of stuff that's based off of like, learning more about your emotions and how to manage them, and basically what you were saying about like stress management and stuff. Um, so I'm working with like 9 to 10 year olds, or like fourth and fifth grade boys. And it's like a really interesting demographic because I'm like, I try to think back to like where I was when I was like 9 or 10, and I'm like, I have no clue. I couldn't begin to tell you about like what I was feeling or thinking or what I had going on, or maybe not. I don't know. But um, anyways, I'm basically just getting to the point that while I was planning one of the activities, it really kind of dawned on me how nuanced a lot of the emotions can get, because I had printed out an emotion wheel, and you know how you have I think it's six. It's either five or six basic emotions. And it's like happy, sad, disgust. Yeah, yeah. Um, and then I started looking at like the ones that branch off a little bit. And it really got to me like in that moment looking at it because the whole concept was for the kids to like pick two of the emotions. And then I really started getting into like the difference between like distraught and despair and blah 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 and all these things. And it really started to highlight the importance of language, kind of like in the whole process of really anything, but specifically dealing with emotions and things of that nature. Because it's like it helps the process so much more if you're trying to talk about it. So in I guess a therapeutic session for the most part, like how do you start, I guess, gauging when you're looking for that level of emotional intelligence within like one of the patients or anything of that nature, I guess. I guess what's the starting point, you know?
For emotions specifically.
Yeah, I guess like let's say you're about to start working with someone new, um,
Hmm.
specifically like a kid, and you're trying to basically like figure out, like, hey, where are they at? What are we working with? Are we doing the play therapy or are we moving away from that? What kind of things do we talk about? I guess anything in that realm. I hope it's not too broad of a question, but
No, yeah. I I think I'm a very interesting case in a clinical sense because I do I do play with all ages, and
I
that
like
doesn't
that.
necessarily and that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to bring out toys for my adult clients, but I think it's important to be able to bring joy into a therapeutic setting because that fosters a sense of comfortability that allows for more fruitful conversations.
That's the truth.
So I think for my younger clients, I'm always gonna introduce play.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean I'm gonna stick with play, but I'm always gonna introduce play. And with my older clients, I'm always going to introduce activities that allow us to think about topics in a more abstract way.
Yeah.
So for example, I I've done this activity with a few clients. It's it's called the perfect snowman activity. So I usually have Play-Doh for this. And I've done this activity with adults.
Yeah.
And we do two rounds. The first round, I I put out the Play-Doh or Play-Doh and I tell my client, you have 2 minutes to build the perfect snowman.
Ooh.
And during these 2 minutes, I want you to talk me through your thought process and any feelings that are coming up for you during this task.
Yeah.
And usually people are stressed or frustrated. Some people feel like they needed more time to really get the idea of what they wanted. And after the 2 minutes, we debrief and I bring up the point. It's interesting that you decided to build a 3D version of a snowman because in the instructions, I never said it had to be a 3D snowman. I just
Okay,
said
yeah.
make a perfect snowman.
Yeah.
So then when we do the second round, I ask them to build any snowman that they want, and
Yeah.
you get 2 minutes. And again, talk me through your thought process, what feelings are coming at XYZ. And usually when they do this activity, and we reflect on it, they say that they had more fun with the second one.
Okay, yeah.
They felt like there weren't any expectations they had to meet. They felt like they were okay with the little bit of time that they had, and it
Yeah.
felt more freeing. And after we do that debrief, I asked them, why do you think I had you do this activity? And the reason we do this activity, I usually do this with people who might struggle with perfectionism,
Yeah.
with the idea that whose expectations are you operating under? With the first task, you are assuming what I think is a perfect snowman, even though I never once told you what a perfect snowman even means.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
And we want to rewire how we approach the things that we do instead of necessarily doing a task for the satisfaction of another person,
Yeah,
do it for the satisfaction of yourself.
yeah. Damn.
So I do activities like this because I think it's important to be very active in
Yeah,
therapy. And with older clients, this is always interspersed with actual conversations about these topics. But for younger clients who might not necessarily know concepts or have language to be able to have conversations such as this, I have different handouts that we look at together to help them start having those building blocks so that we can progress in our therapeutic journey together. Um, I have if you allow me to share my screen,
of
I
course.
have
Yeah.
pulled up a emotions wheel that I use with some of my clients.
Okay, yeah. Sure thing. Here, let me do the always botch this because I'm like, oh, so do you have the
Okay.
option to
Yeah, we're good to
okay.
go. Let me know if you see my screen.
Okay, I can see it. Oh, snap. It's the oh my God.
So,
Jesus.
so in the center here, you have the six basic emotions that people in all societies experience. And as you broaden out, you have more words to say the same emotion that you're experiencing, but you use different words in different contexts.
Yeah.
So this is the second part to this activity, but usually what I ask younger clients to do, or even neurodivergent clients, or just clients who don't have language, anyone who I feel might benefit from this,
Yeah.
I ask them to on a piece of blank paper write as many emotion words as they can think of in 2 minutes.
All right.
And then we do that, we look through what they have, and then we look at this wheel together, see what words they might have written or might not.
Yeah.
And then we go through this wheel as a way to start seeing, oh, you wrote suspicious. That's just another form of anger, whether we are conscious of that fact or not.
Yeah.
And we're
Oh.
seeing that there's a lot of language that we can have access to express how we're feeling. It's just about learning it.
Yeah.
And learning about emotions is very important in the type of work I do. I my primary form of intervention is called trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy. So
Okay.
the cognitive behavioral therapy part, that's a fancy way of basically saying we want to understand the relationship between our thoughts, our feelings, and our emotions, and how one affects the other, and
Yeah.
how if we change one of these, we can change that entire cycle.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
trauma focus component is that we employ this with people who have experienced profound trauma in their life.
Yeah.
And with TFCBT, we have different modules that we go through in a linear way. And one of the modules that we go through, because this modality is primarily used with children and teenagers, is affect modulation. And what that essentially means is we want to make sure that we and voice and regulate the different emotions that we are experiencing.
Yeah.
But in order to do that, we need to be able to have the language to talk about how we're feeling.
Right.
Once you have the language to talk about how you're feeling, then we could think about, well, what do you want to do about how we're feeling?
Yeah.
So this is a good activity to allow clients to start beginning to develop that language.
Yeah. I like that a lot. That's amazing. I think I it's interesting because I'm like I'm looking at the wheel and I'm thinking about how the activity went down. I think I tried to go in a little too hot, too fast with my plan and whatnot. I'm like, maybe I should chill out. But I do think that was a great way to address the whole thing. I'd say for sure. Um, you got me excited, man. I'm like, I think about it pretty often too, because I'm like, when you were talking about how you were originally like getting into like economics and like going to business school and stuff like that. And it is just really interesting to think about like, well, one, like I could be talking to like an entirely different person, you know what I'm saying? Like had you gone down that route. But as you were telling me about it, I was thinking about it and I'm like, well, I didn't know you at the time, but had I known you and you told me like, hey, I was interested in social work, I would have been like, yes. Yes, please. Seriously. So on that note, um, let's get into like personality a little bit because this is, as you know, I was really interested in getting into doing therapy and doing social work. Um, I was about to say I still am, but I guess that's what I'm doing. I'm a social worker.
Mhm.
Um,
Congrats.
thank you. Yeah, it's a weird feeling, man. I feel you about the whole like not being able to anticipate being where you're at because it's like I never would have thought. I'll tell you that much. But so back to the personality thing. Um, for me personally, that's where my interest started coming in when as soon as I got into like psychology or anything in that realm. Um, it stood out to me, I want to say the most because I just remember being younger and being so thrown off how I was able to look at some person and they'd be able to like it didn't matter who it was they were talking to. It didn't matter what was going on. They wanted what they wanted, and they don't care about the consequences or what might come of it, you know? And then on the flip side, I'd say like people kind of more, at least on my end of the spectrum and whatnot, it's just like, more quiet, more reserved type things. I feel like that's kind of, what do you call it? Like the stereotypical, like A to B type personality type stuff, you know? So I start looking into that, and I think that's what kind of sent me down like a rabbit hole of being like, whoa, like there's aspects of this, and if you're a little too much like this, and something like this happens, you can have an entirely different experience. And basically, if you have this type of personality, this can be a traumatic experience for you, or if you don't, then it's nothing, and it's just another Tuesday night. So I guess I wanted to ask, how much do you kind of factor that into? Like the things that you do when you're working with people, and just kind of your philosophy when it comes to like clinical work as a whole.
I think that's a very important question for clinicians to consider when you're going through formal education. I don't want to speak on other degrees that you could get to be a therapist or counselor or what have you, but specifically for as my in my experience as a social worker, a lot of my education, my formal education was very theory heavy,
Oh yeah,
which I think is important. I think it's important to get the foundational theory behind why certain things happen to people or why they react in certain ways or why certain evidence-based practices are more effective than others.
yeah,
But that being said, real people are not textbook cases.
facts.
Like you can read all the case presentations and or case presentations and textbooks all you want, but real people are not like that.
Yeah,
Real people are not always, and that's not to say they never do, but typically they're not always only going to come in for one problem and call it a day.
yeah, would be nice.
People, it would be nice. It would make my job a lot easier, but um, people are very complex beings.
Right.
Everyone has their own experiences, their own journeys. And when it comes to working with a client, you have to take into consideration everything that makes them who they are. So what you describe as personality, to me in my head, I think about a BPSS. So that's when you're doing an intake, you do what we call biopsychosocial spiritual assessment. And
Okay,
this
yeah.
is a way to get more information about what makes you you.
Yeah.
So I'm getting information about, you know, how was the pregnancy? How was the pregnancy for your mother when you were being born? How how was it for you to reach certain developmental milestones like potty training or walking or talking? Did you meet them at an appropriate developmental time, or were you delayed or you quick XYZ? I'm also looking at, maybe some risk factors that might have come up in your life or some protective factors. I want to know more about who are the people important in your life. So your family, also your friends. If you're close with your neighbors, please tell me about them. If you're part of a club tennis team, tell me about that.
Yeah.
Um, what sort of hobbies do you have? What are things that make you excited about living life? How's your education been? Do you work? Do you live in a house? Do you live in an apartment? Do you live in a trailer? Like, where do you live?
Yeah.
Is it what sort of medical things might you experience? So, do you have a debilitating illness? Are you on medication of any kind? What kind are you on? What is it for? How long have you been on it?
Yeah.
Who's part of your medical team? Do you see a general practitioner regularly? Do you have a psychologist on your health team? Do you see a psychiatrist? Do you see a social worker? Do you see a nutritionist? Do you see XYZ? Um, are you spiritual in any sense? And I use
Oh,
spirituality because not everyone is religious, but some people might believe in something that is not necessarily a god.
right.
Um, so I just want to know everything I can to know about you, because the more I know about who you are, the better I'll be able to develop a plan that will meet your specific needs.
Yeah.
Because we can have two 10-year-olds who both came from a two-parent household with three siblings and a dog that they both live in the suburbs, and they both go to private school, and they both have essentially the same life on paper,
Yeah.
but maybe one kid has diabetes, and that's going to be a completely different experience than a kid who doesn't.
Right.
That's going to change the trajectory of your life, whether you're conscious of that or not. And if I know that, then that can help me plan better for our sessions. So for
Jesus.
example, if this client with diabetes, I see them at noon, well, that's around lunchtime. Maybe I should offer some juice or a snack for our session in case they have concerns about their blood sugar.
Yeah.
That's something I could be thinking about if I knew that. If I
Wow.
didn't know that, that's not to say they won't be fine, but knowing that can help me adjust.
Yeah.
If someone is on Medicaid, but they have difficulty having reliable transportation to and from appointment sessions together, or if I know that they have this insurance, I can help them using their insurance get free transportation offered to them through their insurance because of the nature of our sessions being a medical necessity. But if
Yeah.
this isn't communicated to me, then I can't do anything to help them with
Yeah.
that. So the more I know about you, as long as you're comfortable sharing, I can do the best of my ability and what's in my power to meet any and all needs that you want to have met.
That's okay. That's perfect. Here, one second. I gotta grab my charger. I don't want my laptop to die.
Yeah, for sure.
But I'm gonna hold that thought. So staying in the know is where I'm at right now in my head. I'm like, I like the theme we got going on. Okay. All right. So you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Sweet. So, um, staying in the know. So, I want to bounce back a little bit to what you were saying about originally looking to go to business school and studying like econ and things of that nature. I'm kind of tying in like the personality thing. Because hearing you talk
Mhm.
about it and just like from conversations we've had in before, you're easily one of the most well-versed people when it comes to clinical work or just things or therapeutic techniques just in general. Um, it coming from that background, especially not too long ago, that's like what, like 4 years about, I want to say. Yeah, yeah. And
For me
congrats
wanting to do
on
business or
yeah, like it just making like that transition going from business to deciding to be like a social worker and whatnot. Is like
the transition from business was probably 6 or 7 years ago, but the social work about four.
okay, yeah, yeah. So I wanted to hear more about that because being as well versed as you are, I feel like that's either just you doing your due diligence or you just have a natural knack to look out and care about these things and think about these things just in general. Um, so I want to basically hear the story of whether it was something that was always sitting there was an interest, but you never really gave it like the driven attention that you wanted to until it came up like, hey, like being a social worker is a thing and I'm good at these things and naturally like I feel like it would work. Or was it more so like a things developing, you learn more about it, like, hey, we need more social workers. Especially need more social workers who are people of color. And that just snowball affecting into like, oh, I want to learn more about this, that, and then boom, like here you are now. So I guess, well, how was the journey, at least for you,
I'm smiling because it's just bringing me back. I
I bet.
I've been studying human behavior for about 9 years now.
Jesus.
So so I took my first psychology class my sophomore year of high school,
Okay.
and I took it as an elective. So my sophomore year of high school, I took a psychology course and a sociology course.
Oh, good move.
And my junior year of high school, I took AP psychology because of how much I just enjoyed regular psychology in general.
Yeah.
And I actually unofficially was the teacher's assistant in my AP psychology class.
It's a good start.
Um, so it's interesting because it was when I first took psychology, outside of like my academy classes and like the AP classes I was taking, the psychology class was an elective that I was excited to take for myself.
Yeah. It's a good feeling for sure.
And the more of these types of classes I took, I think now that I'm thinking about this out loud, I think that definitely contributed also to the switch of wanting to go into the more mental health related field. I I'm grateful for my time in the Business and Finance Academy because I do think it helped make me the person I am today.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that those skill sets were transferable to me as a clinician in less obvious ways because I think at the core of business, you want to maximize profits for
Yeah.
whoever you're working with.
Oh,
As a
oh,
client, I want to maximize the growth that my clients will be having. The
Okay.
difference is with business, in some ways, you might have a more active approach in that versus my philosophy as a therapist. I'm embarking on this journey with you to help you see the skills that you already have in you to help you overcome your problems and to help bridge gaps as needed.
Yeah.
Because my belief is that we all have the innate ability to help ourselves. Sometimes we just need people to help us help ourselves.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Because I'm not going to have a client and magically fix them. I am not a fixer. I am not in the business of fixing people.
Fair enough.
That's not what I do. And I make that very clear to my clients when we're first starting. So if you think you're gonna start coming to me and you're gonna be magically fixed, then you should probably find someone else.
Right.
What my job is to listen to what you're telling me, remind you of your skills, teach you new skills, and make sure that you're able to adapt to situations that life throws at you. I
Yeah.
tell my clients all the time, there are 168 hours in a week. I only see you for one of those hours.
Yeah.
You have to be able to find a way to be okay those other 167 days of the week.
Yeah.
And if I am even a small step in helping you with that, then I've done my job.
That's a fact.
But yeah, and with all that being said, I think that doing business as my foundation gave me a more logical, pragmatic approach to therapy,
Yeah.
which is very needed because you get different types of people that come in, and some people are more solution oriented than others.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to adapt to that. And because I come from a background in high school where I was very solution oriented,
Yeah.
I'm able to tap into that mindset and meet these clients' needs for what they are.
Yeah.
Because not everyone is going to be overly emotional, not everyone is going to be gushing within the first few sessions, and that's okay. Some
Yeah.
people just need someone to bounce off of and
Right.
and be a non-biased source to tell them how things really are.
Yeah.
They need that rational, logical person in their life. And I feel that if I didn't have the business background that I did, I would have more difficulty with that more rational, pragmatic side of therapy.
Yeah. That's a great way of like integrating those backgrounds for sure. That's probably the best way that I could think of, honestly. Um, Sweet. Wow. I guess I was thinking of something. Oh yeah. Um so like while you're talking, I kind of got a sense of maybe a little bit more of like getting into like the whole theoretical and like conceptual side of things. I remember when I was learning more about like psych that there was kind of like a class of psychology that was called I think humanistic psychology. And the idea behind it basically was like your belief system about people like inherently. So I kind of want to ask you, but I feel like I already have a good sense of maybe where it is, but I at least want to ask the question officially. Um, so do you think people are inherently good, or do you think otherwise?
That's a good question. I'm curious to hear what your answer is first.
I want to say no, but I want to say they inherently want to be good.
Hmm.
Or at least there's an impulse to want to be good. But I almost want to say there's just as much to want to be bad. And that's the best place I could leave it. And it may not be saying much, but and this is where I'll leave it off. I think that's where the decision to choose comes in. And not to throw like free will and like determinism into the whole mix, but I do start thinking about it. And I'm like, well, I do think it is a choice, you know? And I think you can decide whether or not like you will be inherently good or you will be inherently bad. Even if it's not forever, I think you can decide maybe for a moment. And I think I don't want to say all that's needed, but I do think it's an important thing to take into account. Um, yeah, I guess that's the best way that I would put it.
Okay. I'm gonna start off with a book before I answer your question
Ooh,
fully.
okay.
So, so the current governor of Maryland, his name is Wes Moore,
Yeah,
and back in 2010, he published a novel called The Other Wes Moore, One Name, Two Fates. And Wes Moore, the governor, he grew up in Baltimore, and he, for this book, interviewed someone named Wes Moore,
yeah.
who was also from Baltimore,
Okay.
who was in jail at the time.
This is an interesting start.
They both grew up in the same environment, but they had two very different paths to life.
Yeah,
Wes Moore, the governor, he ended up being a Rhodes Scholar. He was a White House Fellow, a former Army officer, versus the Wes Moore who was in jail, who was a drug dealer, a robber, a murderer, and these are quotes from the book.
yeah.
So I say this to say you have essentially the same person who have different paths to life. And why do we think that is? We have the ability to determine where our life goes, but there are also factors that you have to take into account when you try to determine what was the cause behind people's behaviors. I mentioned this briefly at a couple questions ago about protective factors and risk factors.
Yeah.
So protective factors are essentially factors, things in your life that are positive for your health, both physical, mental, emotional, versus risk factors are things that might be detrimental to your health. So even though you grow up in similar circumstances, you can have differences in what factors are present in your life.
Okay, yeah.
So let's say that you grew up in a household that you had both of your parents, but they smoked crack cocaine in the household on a regular basis,
Yeah.
right? Versus someone who grew up in the same area as you, they grew up in a household of divorce, but their parents didn't engage in substances.
Yeah.
You both have risk factors. Parents who engage in drug use in front of their child growing up in a family of divorce. These are two risk factors in the same environment,
Yeah.
but they're going to have very different effects on your life.
Right.
And I bring this up because I think that people are not necessarily inherently good or inherently evil. We are merely victims of circumstance. If your
Okay.
circumstances don't necessarily facilitate positive growth in your life, it's not to say you can't achieve a quote unquote successful life. You are just starting two, three, four steps behind what another person might be in order to achieve the same goal.
Yeah.
Also, the way that we are socialized also affects how we interact with the world. If you grow up in a hyper religious household that ingrains gender norms in you, that ingrains white supremacy in you, that ingrains homophobia in you, 9 times out of 10, you're also going to continue holding those beliefs later in life.
Right.
Versus someone who doesn't have any of that exposure, they typically wouldn't develop those same lines of thinking, but they could also develop that on their own.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily 100% protected from being exposed to what we consider evils of the world.
Yeah.
But if you're experiencing them at a young age, it's harder for you to unlearn these things versus if you're finding out about these things on your own when you have a more developed sense of identity, a more developed knowledge base where you can be more informed in engaging with these things and determining whether you want to buy into it or not.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I think kind of bouncing off that a little bit. So I started thinking like awareness and kind of like how much you're conscious of about kind of like your environment and what things have kind of been pushed on you. Also let me know if it's like a little too loud or anything like that. Um, I
You're
can't
good,
hear.
you're good.
Okay, sweet. Um, so um yeah, awareness. So I started thinking, I'm like, okay, um, how much you can immediately like identify as like, hey, this was something set up prior to me at least being able to have like my own opinions or my perceptions and whatnot that I never even had the time to question. Um, I feel like is what you're getting at. Kind of like social structures a little bit, you know? Um, uh, as you were talking about it, I was thinking about to what you were saying about the was it chismo? Or is it
Machismo.
machismo? Yeah. And stuff like that. I feel like might be like a great example, kind of that concept right there. Um, so I guess I want to say like more on like a personal note, I guess, what would be some of the things that you would say were like those like social structures that you kind of like realize like, hey, these things have been here kind of my whole life at least, and I never really questioned it until more recently that were basically like products of my environment that kind of like rubbed off on me and kind of turned me into who I am, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think the first one that comes to my mind, and obviously these are going to be personal examples of my life. I grew up, so I guess for context, I identify as a gay person,
Right,
but I grew up with a lot of internalized homophobia because in my community, in my household, being queer was frowned upon.
right.
I remember when I first came out to someone in my family. Actually, let me backtrack. When I first realized I felt this way,
Yeah.
I remember I asked my oldest brother one night casually, if I ever married a man, would you go to my wedding? And he said,
Oh.
absolutely not.
You said absolutely or absolutely?
Absolutely not.
Oh, that's not a good start.
And it's funny because not haha funny as in oh that later in life when I brought up this conversation to him, he mentions not like he says he doesn't remember it,
Yeah.
which fine, but I didn't make it up. It happened.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but I remember after that conversation, I was thinking to myself, no one can ever know this about me. I'm gonna have to fake being in love with a woman in the future and marry her and have kids so no one can know that I have these feelings that I'm gay and whatnot.
Right.
And I think I think once I started telling like my friends about it in school, it got a little easier, but at the same time, it wasn't something I ever allowed myself to act on. I
Yeah.
never gave myself permission during my teenage years to have a normal teenage life. So I never dated, I never went out, I never did all these things because the people that I thought I would want to do these things with, other boys my age, I didn't think I was allowed to do that.
Yeah.
So because of what was ingrained in me and because of this internalized homophobia I experienced, I feel like I lost a lot from my youth that and then that was difficult to reconcile as I moved out to college and started developing a more sense of who I was.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just difficult because as the point to as a tie into my answer to the last question, I was socialized to think a certain way,
Yeah.
and it took me years to be able to unlearn that and to love myself
Yeah.
for who I am.
Yeah. Damn, that's a lot to think about, especially because at least kind of like putting myself in your shoes as you were kind of like telling the story. I'm thinking about how it might be a weird situation to kind of know that you're deviating from, like a social norm, and not really know kind of where to address it because like I guess in the weirdest way, it's like new territory, not even for yourself, but for like a lot of people. So I kind of think about what you're saying, like with your brother, and like in a moment like that, because I think about when I was younger and like a lot of the things that I either asked to either like my mom or my older brother, things at the time that in that moment were like the most important thing in the world to me. But in hindsight, like in their eyes, it could be just kind of looking at it like, oh, like, it's like whatever. And I do think about how much that might kind of like shape your mental framework of like life and yourself and kind of like how all that stuff works. Um, Thank you for telling me that too, by the way, because I know you know, it's not easier going back into like the older stuff. Um, so I guess how would you say, comparatively speaking, going from like then to where you are now, at least, and I guess what were like the major steps to kind of get you to the point where it's just like, hey, like, this has been like a social construct that I never really got to question, and there are these things around me, and this is the world that I'm in now, and I need to accept some things, but also at the same time like learn that hey, like I'm paving a new path in some areas, either for myself or the world in general.
Yeah, I think leaving home was definitely a big contributor.
Yeah,
I felt that I would have stagnated if I would have stayed in Maryland. So definitely that change of environment was helpful. I think college in general liberalizes a lot of people
that's
because
facts.
you are exposed to so many different things that you might not have had the opportunity to experience beforehand. I am reminded of a summer program that I was a part of the summer heading into my senior year of high school. So this was summer of 2017, and it was a summer program at the University of Michigan actually. And I remember the first activity that we all did together. I say activity loosely. It was essentially the facilitators were setting the ground rules for the program. But I remember we were all sitting in circles, and the facilitator said, "Okay, we're all gonna go around. You're gonna introduce yourself, say your name, your pronouns, where you're from, and why you're here. And I remember sitting there and thinking to myself, what do you mean my pronouns? I had
Yeah.
never heard that before.
Yeah.
Um, and that was the first time that I, that program was the first time I developed close relationships with people that were part of the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah.
And that definitely brought a sense of comfort because I realized there are other people like me or other people that don't fall under what society considers normal. And
Right.
that's okay. And then once I got to college, I was more active in choosing different spaces I wanted to be a part of.
Yeah.
So I joined organizations that were very diverse in their membership and their leadership.
Yeah.
Later in college, I was very active with the Spectrum Center, which is a LGBTQ plus center at U of M. In my classes, whenever I had projects where I could choose what topic I wanted to do, I always found a way to talk about mental health, the LGBTQ plus community, or my culture.
Yeah.
And this was a way to allow myself to heal, also learning more about the things that make up who I am.
Yeah.
Like, it was important for me as a queer person to educate myself on queer history because seeing the struggle that other people went through to allow me to live the way I want to, it's not lost upon me. And I don't think this is something every queer person does or necessarily needs to do, but it was essential for my journey
Yeah.
because I learned about the collective struggle of our community and how important it is to live my truth as a way to honor the people that came before me in this struggle.
Yeah.
And I And once I started having these foundations, I started allowing myself to do things that I wanted to do simply because I wanted to do it and not allowing myself to continue this notion that I'm not allowed to like something or do something.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. So I remember when I was still in my internalized homophobia stage of my life, I was very against the idea of the art form of drag.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with RuPaul's Drag Race, which is the mainstream way that people know about drag now.
Yeah.
But I remember for the longest time, I thought to myself, I can never watch that. People will think XYZ about me. And I can't be like that.
Yeah.
But once I started doing all this work on myself, I started engaging with drag. So I started watching Drag Race. I started going to drag shows. I this didn't ultimately happen, but with my fraternity, I wanted to host a like drag history event and have some performers come in.
Yeah.
And I did this because it was something I enjoyed.
Right. Yeah.
I remember summer of 2022, I want to say, I started experimenting with my gender expression. So I started using makeup. I started wearing dresses just to see like if this is something I want to do. And I gave myself that permission to
Yeah.
start experimenting with these things. And um, yeah, and I think the biggest thing was like once I got to college, I allowed myself to start dating, which
Yeah.
is something I never let myself do growing up. And I was finally doing things for myself because I realized that, at least for me, the only person I should be aiming to please is myself. And as
Right.
long as I'm happy with the decisions that I'm making, then I'm doing pretty good with my life.
Yeah. Wow, yeah. That's a great way of putting it. Seriously. I especially like the way that you broke down the whole thing because it's like it is daunting. Like, that's just in general, like kind of like going against the norm, But I guess more than anything else, and it's weird because in essence they're kind of the same thing, but just being yourself, you know? And it's like it's scared or not scared, but it's scary to hear you say like give yourself permission, Because it's like you do kind of have to give yourself permission. Like there's a whole lot of I feel like power in that statement too, like the way that you put it, because it's just like, well, you have the power to give yourself permission. It almost what's the word? It implies that you had control the whole time, you know, but you never really knew it. And I feel like it's a beautiful thing to hear you express how you kind of took that into your own hands.
Yeah,
Hey,
I think I might have mentioned this to you through text, but life is full of choices at the end of the day. You either make one choice or the other. And when you're passive, whether you're aware of it or not, you are making a choice.
guys.
But now I'm being mindful and active in the decisions that I'm making for myself, and actively choosing things for myself. And I think that's something that we as a society need to do more of. We need to give ourselves permission to do or not do things for ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, my bad. I got a FaceTime call. Try to get it back to the full screen. On that note, um, so this is going to be a more of like an open-ended, like broad type question. How do I get it back? I can't see anything. Okay. Well, maybe if I just leave it alone. Oh, there we go. Okay. Um, so you mentioned that needing to be something that like the world could use more of, which I agree 1,000%. Um, on that note, I guess, what are some things, like first things that come to mind, at least, you just look at the world in general, whether it be like the whole world or just, the Western world, or at least in your immediate environment, I guess what's something that you feel like people need more in general? And you can go as specific or as broad as you want with it. Like it just be like, oh, more positivity. You could say everyone needs to keep a spoon in their back pocket at all times because whatever the fuck.
Okay. Um, Not to get too political, but I'm gonna get political.
I'll get political, please.
I think people need to I think I don't want to okay. I'm just trying to figure out the best way to phrase this. I think people need to get over themselves in
Dang.
the sense that in this let me explain.
Yeah, yeah.
I think so I'm very pro Palestine.
Okay.
I think that Palestine deserves to be free and deserves to have their own ancestral land given back to them. And the genocide and oppression on the hands of Israel right now is very saddening to see
Yeah.
in real time. And when I say people need to get over themselves, one, people need to stop believing every single piece of propaganda they believe.
Yeah.
It's very dumbfounding how easy it is for people to fall for Israeli propaganda. I think too, with all the boycotting that we as a collective are attempting to do for companies that invest in Israel or companies that are on the that are part of the BDS list that have been going around from Palestinian organizers. People online that I've seen anyway, and some of them could be trolls, some of them could be genuine, but regardless, you know, it might be inconvenient for you to not go to McDonald's or not to get your coffee from Starbucks, but it's the least that you can do to show support for this oppressed people right now. And for you to say, I don't care about what's going on there, I'm gonna go get my McDonald's or I'm gonna go get my Starbucks, that's very, very egotistical, self-centered, very Western. I think it's very difficult for me to fathom the idea that you care so little about other people that you're gonna put your own comfort and convenience over attempting to help this movement
Yeah.
that has been going on for decades now. And I think that the Biden administration is so frustrating because they think that we're stupid, and
Fair enough.
it's it's very apparent that they are pro-Israel. Biden has on multiple occasions now self-proclaimed Zionists. They have sent billions in aid to Israel.
Yeah.
They keep vetoing the resolution for a permanent ceasefire at the UN.
I did not
They
know
are
that.
doing very little to help in a situation that they themselves are contributing and enabling.
Yeah.
Yet they think that saying, "Oh, we're going to ship out food and airdrop food to Gaza, even though that food is expired, and even though you're the ones contributing to this, you are saying, oh, this country has no room for Islamophobia, yet you bow down to the Zionists who are very anti-Islamic, very anti-Palestinian.
Yeah.
You can't have it both ways.
Right.
And this TikTok ban that has been going around, it's not just a TikTok ban. This is giving the US government the power to essentially control and censor any and all information that we as consumers in the US are going to be able to access.
Yeah.
And it's very convenient that this is coming at a time when our generation has been radicalized and mobilized by TikTok in learning more and being educated more about the situation that's happening in Palestine.
Facts.
But the powers that be are now terrified of the fact that we are being educated on something that they don't want us to be educated on.
Yeah.
And that in itself is oppression. And that is a form of authoritarianism and fascism that the average person is not going to recognize that is dangerous for our society as a whole. And it is setting a dangerous precedent because if the US can start controlling this, it's not going to stop them from controlling every facet of our life.
Yeah.
And it's it's funny to me when I hear people talk about how we're the greatest country in the world when I don't think we've been that for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
But if I say that out loud to someone, it might ostracize me because that makes me anti-American. Okay, I'm anti-American then if that means I'm gonna support noble causes and to protest and organize for the lives of other people.
Yeah.
And ultimately, now we're in the moment in time where we're about to get Biden versus Trump 2, when
Oh shit. So
both
did
of them are
sorry,
both
no,
of them
keep
are bad options for this country. And with Trump, we're gonna get a convicted felon of sorts, essentially, for for liability sake. I don't know if he was actually fully prosecuted, but he's had a
Ah,
lot of charges. He's been impeached a couple of times. And then you have Biden, who is ostracizing his young voter base by making all of these decisions that are unpopular with how they're acting towards Palestine, while also failing to secure any of his campaign promises. We still do not have the free 2 years of community college that was promised to us.
oh
We
yeah.
still don't have the student loans canceled like it was promised to us. We still have to pay insane amounts of money for everything now. Like the inflation is terrible right now,
Oh yeah.
and like pardon my language, but we're fucked. No matter who gets elected, we are fucked.
You're right. I agree. That's what, just on a quick little personal note, that's kind of what prompted me to like start like wanting to talk to people more and start doing interviews and all this shit. Cause I started looking around, I'm like, we gotta get something understood at this point. Cause shit just seems like it's all over the place. And it's like I don't even know what to expect anymore after a certain point. And it is scary, it's scary to think about. Um uh, Rolling back to what you were saying specifically about TikTok, the as far as I can tell, the most valuable resource, or at least one of the most valuable resources in the world today, is information and data. Um, the moment you brought that up, I kind of realized I'm like, dang, like I did a complete 180 when it came to the whole TikTok thing. I used to be all like, oh no, it's terrible, misinformation, hyper convenience, it's nothing good about it and all this stuff. Um, More recently, as I've been trying to like get more involved and like looking into things and learning about certain subjects and talking to more people, I realize how much of a tool it is. People learn a shit ton from TikTok. Like seriously, I have people sending me recipes and stuff and everything. And it's one of the most efficient forms of like getting informative information about anything. Um, Sorry, I went on a bit of a rant because I'm thinking about it now.
No, you're good, you're good. And like I'm not a TikTok user myself either, but I think people should have the
Nah,
ability to choose whether they want to use it or not.
yeah.
And for the US to basically tell the owner, if you don't sell TikTok within 6 months to an American based company or person or what have you, and we won't let our citizens use your app, that's xenophobic in my opinion.
That's the biggest red flag you could probably have too, because it's like, well, you know, why not? Well, I guess I understand a decent amount from the other side. So I know when it comes to the whole privacy concerns and whatnot, there were a ton of red flags there. I can't speak too much on that because I haven't looked into it like that, but I will say it is a little bit concerning more than anything else because I saw this post the other day that kind of like highlighted how get the privacy concerns, things of that nature and whatnot, but we have literal wars going on, and it seems like that bill that's passing through, is it like the House, I want to say, it already got
It
approved
passed
through.
through the house, yeah.
It seemed like that was maybe I found out about it a little bit late, but it seemed like that happened a little fast. And I'm like, yeah, I'm
It
like,
was quick.
yeah, priorities. It really got me thinking. I'm like, all right,
And and just to interject, if privacy concerns were really something they cared about, then why do they let Facebook and Meta continue the way that they're operating when
damn.
they've sold user information? They've helped with the Russian hack of the presidential election in the past. Like, there's
Yo,
privacy concerns within American tech companies. So
right.
if privacy was really something you cared about, you would crack down on companies like Meta. But you're not. You're choosing to crack down on a company that is not standing for your bullying and your pressure and is not going to sell just because you're demanding it.
Yeah, that's a fact. And I feel like it's crazy too, because it's like, I feel like having that realization, it's like, Well, it's actually not too wild. It seems like our government's doing something, what do you call it? Has ulterior motives, once again, which is not it's not that rare when you really start thinking about it. And it's like, damn, okay. It kind of fucks me up that the TikTok thing is also kind of what pushed me a little bit more to like start looking into it. I feel like I come from a weird spot because it's like when it comes to a lot of like the social issues, I don't poke my head out until I'm ready to go into it like all the way a lot of the time. So um I'm thinking about kind of what you were saying about everything in Palestine too, and I'm like, well, as far as I can tell, I don't know the ins and outs of the situation, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't look like someone's just being a bully. It's like I can see bullying, you know, when I see it. It's not that hard to kind of make out. Um, so I don't know. Again, I don't know all the ins and outs and everything, but from what I can tell, it's there's an area that's basically surrounded by like Israeli territory, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Is it?
With Palestine.
Yeah. And then
So yeah, it's occupied by Israeli colonizers,
okay.
and it's been occupied for 75 years now.
Yeah, it's been so I did find out about that. I'm like, this isn't new. So this is something that's kind of been like not spurring up, but been going on for like a while, like territorial type shit. Yeah, again, I'm gonna definitely do a little deep dive on that. I think we should also probably plan on doing maybe like a part two. We're finishing up kind of because I also should get going maybe in about like 10, 15, but um I do want to pick your brain on that more because I appreciate being able to talk to someone coming from like a psychological background and more like a therapeutic background because it's like I feel like people in that realm understand the importance of going to the individual first as opposed to trying to address like multiple people or like a broader problem from a like a societal standpoint. And that's not to knock the importance of coming from that direction. um but at least speaking from my personal experience, I have seen how effective it can be to like make a bigger impact just on that one-to-one scale. um so I guess personally speaking, like what would you say is what would be like your best kind of advice to anyone who when it comes to like learning about those things, whether it be like world affairs or politics or things of that nature, especially like in this information or economy, because what fucks me up more than anything else is, and this is why I was so against TikTok in the first place, was anyone can post anything a little too fast. I heard what you were saying about the like the propaganda that they were putting out. That was one of the biggest things that had also caught my attention early on because I heard that there was like an ad campaign and it was basically being pushed from like one side and it was big. It seemed like a lot of people were feeding into it and it looked like it was turning into a big problem. And at that point, I was just like, I threw my hands up in the air because I was like, I don't know, you know? And I basically, as I'm looking to get more into it, I guess I'm kind of wondering like where do you go to kind of like make sure you're not getting that false information. It's as unbiased as you possibly can get, and also keeping a healthy balance between like staying in the know, but also not consuming yourself with things that you may not be able to do anything about immediately.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I think this will be my last response because I also have to go.
Okay, that's
Just letting you
perfect.
know. So, two words, and then I'll expand, but two words.
Okay.
Media literacy.
Yeah, yeah, there we go.
Media literacy is very important in our day and age where all types of information are readily available on the tip of your fingers with, your phone.
Yeah.
You are going to be able to access so much information from so many different sources. But You need to be able to determine whether a source is trustworthy or not. Some quick ways, just off the top of my head, the domain of a website can tell you a lot. If a website is .gov, for example, you can trust that that is reliable information. That's not to say it's not biased information, but you can
Yeah,
trust that that's trustworthy information
yeah,
versus a .com domain. Anyone can develop a website. Anyone can have their own website and include any information they want.
yeah,
So those are some you should be more worried about. But with any information that you're coming across, fact check it. You can't just go off of the first thing you read. Let's say you're reading a newspaper article, for example. Every newspaper article should have a list of sources at the end of the article
yeah,
somewhere. Look through those sources. Check those to see if those are trustworthy sources as well. You can't just go off of the first thing you read. You need to make sure that there are other sources that are backing up what you just read. Because if there are some discrepancies, then maybe that information is not verifiable and it's not trustworthy.
yeah. Sounds about right to me. I want to emphasize that too more than anything else because I'm sitting here thinking about it and I'm like, in sheer numbers, people can post 30 different takes on something in literally less than like, 15 minutes. So yeah,
Yeah.
but I like that. I like that a lot. Um, but all right, sweet. Thank you. Seriously, for real. Like, we gotta meet up. I don't know when you're coming back, but we at least gotta do something first chance you get. What's it looking like?
I don't know if I'll necessarily have the time, but I do plan on being in town the first weekend of April.
Okay. Okay. Good to
But
know.
I'll let you know more about my schedule once I have it solidified. But if we want to do something like this again, just shoot me a message with your availability and then we can schedule something else.
This sounds good. This is perfect. Sweet. Well, I'll keep you posted with everything. And just double checking and making sure like not even saying for sure like this would be like posted, but I definitely think I want to. I'm
Yeah,
like,
no, that's totally fine.
yeah,
Yeah,
sweet. All right, cool. Well, good luck with everything, especially the new job. Keep me posted on that. Definitely got some more questions because I feel like it'd help bouncing ideas off you because it's like, well, in a lot of ways, it's like a similar job. I'm just not doing like one-on-one type stuff. Um,
yeah,
but yeah,
for sure.
silly. Yeah. Well, you have a good night, and I will text you. I'll let you know when I have it like edited and finished and everything too. So,
Sounds good. Take it easy.
all right, you too. Peace out.
Peace.